This is the third lesson in a big series where I'm teaching the top 25 jazz standards for guitar players. Studying real songs on the guitar is critical for our musical development. It helps us understand the language of harmony and song structure and musical phrasing and so much more. And jazz standards are some of the most masterfully crafted songs of all time. If you learn the jazz standards in this series, you will not only majorly level up your musicianship, you'll be able to play music with anyone in the whole world who plays any amount of jazz, because every jazz player at any level knows at least a couple of these jazz standards, if not most of them, if they're serious about jazz. So if you're interested in playing jazz guitar at all, then you are in the right place. There's a link to a playlist of this entire series in the description. Please watch the very first video of the series at some point, because I explain a lot more about how this series works and how it's structured. If you're liking this series so far, or if you just found it from this video and you're excited, either way, please leave a comment and let me know below. I can't tell you how much it helps more students find this series who want to learn about these songs. And the more people who know these standards, the better, because you might jam with one of them someday. Plus, I just like to hear from you. So thank you so much for leaving comments on my videos. The song we're learning today is number 3 out of the top 25 jazz standards for guitar players. And the song is Impressions by John Coltrane. Here's what we're going to cover in this lesson. First, I'll tell you about the song Impressions and why it's worth learning. Then I'll teach you the melody by clearly demonstrating it on the guitar with notation and tab on the screen, showing you exactly where on the fretboard I first recommend learning how to play this melody. I will show you the scales that the melody comes from, and in this case, the scales the melody comes from are the same scales we need to improvise over the song. Exactly the same. That's not always the case with every song. If you watch more in this series, you'll see what I mean. In this case, it's nice to have them very simple scales to work over, which is why it's a great song to improvise on. I'll teach you the chords and the harmony and how to comp on this song. And this is really unique because we're going to use a totally different type of chord than we're used to. Not typical guitar shapes, not typical jazz chords, but a type of chord called chordal harmony. And because we're playing in a modal style of jazz, I'll tell you more about that in a minute. I'll teach you the scales you need to improvise over it, which are the same ones the melody comes from, and I'll give demonstrations and recommendations for how to practice improvising over this. I usually give multiple versions of scales to work on a song. In this case, it's so simple. You're going to just be able to dive in and get started on improvising with it right away. In every lesson in this series, I give a unique piece of advice on how to truly internalize a jazz standard on the guitar, which just applies to any song, so I will share that. Impressions by John Coltrane is one of the most iconic jazz standards in the modern jazz repertoire. It was first released in 1963 on Coltrane's album called Impressions, named after the song. The tune is built on a simple, open 2-chord vamp, D minor for 16 bars, and then E flat minor for 8 bars, and then back to D minor for 8 bars, creating a 32-bar form that is perfect for modal improvisation. What's interesting about Impressions is that Coltrane based the entire form and the harmony of this tune on another famous jazz standard, So What by Miles Davis, which Coltrane actually played on when it was first recorded on the classic 1959 album called Kind of Blue. Both songs, Impressions and So What, share the same Dorian mode approach and the same 32-bar structure, but Coltrane, of course, took the form, took the style, and made it his own, took it his own direction, bringing a much more fiery, hard-driving energy to the improvisation and at a much faster tempo. Now, I would have put So What here as song number 3 in this list of the top 25 jazz standards for guitar players, but I've already done several lessons on playing that tune, including how to comp in a modal context, improvising in Dorian, and definitely a full tutorial on how to play the melody of So What. So think of song number 3 on this list as either So What or Impressions. They're the same form, same harmony, same key, everything, just different melodies and typically different tempos. So What is slower, Impressions is usually played much faster, but you can do whatever you want. George Benson did a very fast version of So What, and it's really cool. So if you want to learn So What, or just check out those other lessons I did about it, just use the links in the description. Both of these tunes represent the modal jazz revolution that changed the course of jazz history in the late 1950s and early 1960s. They moved away from the rapid chord changes of bebop and towards a more spacious approach focused on scales and modes. If you want to learn So What or Impressions, or ideally both, you'll be covering covering one of the most essential forms in modern jazz, and you'll also get a great feel for modal playing, which is crucial for any jazz guitarist. Knowing the scales that a melody comes from is really helpful for learning melodies, so make sure you practice the scales too, and not just the melody, not just memorizing my finger goes here on this fret, my finger goes here on this fret. You want to see the context of where a melody comes from. We'll be going over those scales in the Scales for Soloing section coming up in this video. You can always link to any section by using the timestamp links in the description. Now I'll play you the Impressions melody, and I encourage you to use this section to practice along with my demonstration until you have it down. There will be guitar tab and notation on the screen as I play, so you can see exactly where on the fretboard I recommend first learning how to play this melody. Here it is at 130 beats per minute. Let's learn the chords next and how to play the harmony on this song. Here you can see it's written as D minor 11, D minor 11, E flat minor 11, E flat minor 11, D minor 11, D minor 11. There's a repeat sign here, so this actually happens twice. So this is 16 bars and then 8 bars and then 8 bars. So it's a lot of this one type of chord. So what's happening here is that D minor, you can think of it as D minor 7 with an 11. That's what that means, D minor 7 with an 11. This is actually just an approximation of what the harmony is supposed to be. This is an attempt to write the harmony in a way that makes sense with chord symbols with what we call tertiary harmony. But really, we are playing in a modal context. So it doesn't exactly have a key center. It has kind of a mode center. It doesn't have functional harmony, which means these chords aren't functioning. It's not the 2 of something. It's not having any 2-5-1s or anything like that. It's just this static wash of a sound. That's kind of the feel of what modal harmony and modal jazz is, where every scale note is kind of a chord tone. There's not really a chord happening here. However, there's not a way to notate that really with chord symbols, so this has kind of become the standard for how it's written, say, like in the real book, or if you look it up online, like you're seeing right now, it's written like this. But really, this is D Dorian. This is the scale D Dorian, which is the second mode of the major scale. What's important is that you can really play that and hear it on the guitar, which we're going to talk about in the improvisation section. So don't worry about that. You're going to have fun playing with it. The root is D, and otherwise it's a D Dorian scale. And yes, if you make a chord with a 1, 3, 5, and 7 off of the D Dorian scale, you get D minor 7. And the D minor 11 is just adding this 11 in gives it a little more of a modal sound, a little more of a quartal sound, which we're about to talk about. So quartal chords and kind of modal harmony are built in fourths, intervals of fourths, instead of intervals of thirds, whereas typical chords are built on thirds. So if you want to go deeper on either of those things, check out my video called The Best Theory Explanation of Tertiary Chords, something like that. I'll link to it in the description, as well as my video on quartal harmony, explaining all the theory of all of that stuff, and you will really know it well. For this video, we're just going to talk about using it for the sake of actually playing this song. Let's go over back to guitar view to actually play the chords, and I will teach you how to do this. So usually for this series, I'm showing you shell voicings for all the tunes. This would be a D minor 7 shell voicing. Link in the description to a video all about shell voicings, how to use them, how to use them on any chord with very few chord shapes. This has 1, flat 3, and flat 7. And then I also show the kind of more common filled out shapes. This would be D minor 7, or there's like a D minor 7 over here. Okay, that's tertiary chords. That has 1, 3, 5, 7. It's built on thirds. But this, if I just take this finger away from this typical chord shape, then I get all fourths. From here's D, up a fourth, up a fourth, up a fourth. And that is a quartal chord because it's stacked fourth. It's a chord built on fourths instead. And when you build chords on fourths, you don't get a specific chord name. You just get a sound. You just get a sound. And if I go through the scale, that's another one. And that's another one, that's another one, that's another one, that's another one. So these are the chord shapes that you want to comp with on a modal jazz tune like So What or Impressions. And again, if you want to learn more about that and see graphics and diagrams of all of that stuff, please just go to the links in the description with my thorough chordal chords video and also my comping on chordal harmony or comping on So What video. That'll show you all the visuals aligned with this. But this will teach you just fine right now how to do this in this very simple way. And this is how I'm comping on the backing track and how I'm comping on my own playing in the intro that you heard. So this shape, 5th fret, 5th fret, 5th fret, 6th fret, that's that chordal shape. But we're going to take it just strings 4, 3, 2, 5th fret, 5th fret, 6th fret, that shape. And that is the only shape we're going to use. We're going to go up a whole step. We're going to go up a whole step. And we're going to take those 3 that are a whole step away and kind of think of it as the center. And you can use those equally as much as you want. Okay, that's like how I was comping when I did the demonstration at the beginning and how I'll comp on the backing track for you. Okay, you can go down 3 frets to this side, same exact shape. Okay, you can go 3 frets up on this side, same exact shape. What do we have now? Okay, then you can go an extra whole step either direction on the side of that. So whole step, down a minor third, 3 frets. These 3 in the middle we learned, down to 3 frets, and that. There's your vocabulary for comping in chordal harmony on D Dorian. Don't worry about what Dorian means yet. We're going to talk about that in the scale section coming right up. Okay, just for extra bonus, you could play a chordal chord here. Fret 777, 555, 777, 555. It's outlining like a pentatonic sound. It's a very open sound. You could just use any of those anytime for this modal comping on Dorian. Now, when the chord goes to quote unquote E flat minor 11, which really just means E flat Dorian. And by the way, it's called 11 in the chord shape because this note that we added here is the 11. So this chordal chord kind of includes an 11 if you analyzed it as a tertiary chord. Okay, mainly just work on learning these and playing them. Same thing up a half step. Here's E flat, here's that shape, here's the 3, down 3 frets, down a fret, down 2 frets. There's those 3, up 3 frets, up a whole step. So it's everything just shifted up a half step and then you go here again. Then when you go up, you go back down. That is the quintessential sound that you'll get really used to if you play either So What or Impressions a lot, that it's going half step between those 2 minor 11 type chords / actually meaning Dorian. Okay, so that's the way to comp on this and rhythmically kind of just do whatever you want and whatever feels good. Let's move on to the next section of the video. Next, I'll show you the scales you need to be able to improvise and solo over the Impressions chord progression. I'll demonstrate and show you diagrams of all the scales in one specific overlapping position on the fretboard, which is where I highly recommend that you learn how to improvise with them before worrying about playing all over the fretboard. Though on this song, you can get to switching positions pretty quickly because the scales are so simple. So let me show you those. Well, there's not much to say here because I usually in every tune, I'll give you a complete scales version of how you can improvise over a song and then a simplified scales version of how to ignore some of the stuff that just kind of goes by and you don't need to perfectly nail, especially at first. Well, here we just have Dorian, D Dorian, just like I said, E flat Dorian, just like I said. That's all there is to it. It's already the simplest it can possibly be. That's why this is so fantastic to work on improvising, and you can stretch out and work on your phrasing and add chromatic notes or whatever you want. So what is the D Dorian scale and where should you play it? Well, let's jump back to guitar and I'll show you diagrams and demonstrate and get you playing these scales on this tune. I like to always play all my scales and master every song and every scale I need as close to the 5th position as possible. So all my scales are overlapping, all my chord tones, all my vocabulary is overlapping, and I can connect ideas together seamlessly. If I do that, then I'm using every shape possible. If I end up playing in every key, which means I can then play all over the fretboard, I call this my single location improv method, or I refer to it as SLIM. I have a whole very detailed system behind how to work on it. So that's what shows up in my teaching here. The C major scale in that position is here. What's cool about this system is throughout this whole series, you'll see me use the same scale in the same spot. That's the whole point. You want to get really familiar with every shape and not ignore a certain shape. So when we do another tune in the key of C, you'll see that exact C major scale over and over again. So why am I showing you C major? Well, that's because the D Dorian scale is the second mode of C major. All that means is that it is the same exact scale notes, same note selection, but the root, the main note, the home base note that is emphasized as the main sound is D instead. It's the second note of the scale from C, so it's called the second mode of C major. So it's the second mode of any major key is Dorian mode. And the structure happens to be something specific. If you call this 1, you get different numbers: 1, 2, flat 3, 4, 5, natural 6, flat 7, 1. Some people will think of their mode that way, but at first, just practice it. So that's why it is called a mode, and that's where Dorian comes from, and it's as simple as that. And actually, you can just think C major when you're improvising on a modal tune like Impressions or So What. You can just play the C major scale. You can play any C major scale shape, or you can think of it as Dorian with D as the root. Okay, so here's the scale again with the diagram on the screen. Okay, why am I playing it that way? This is what I call the root to root method. Well, here is a perfect example of why I play that way, because it's the same notes as C major, but when I play off C and start on C, pause on C, repeat C, and land on C, it sounds like C major. When I start on D, repeat D every time I come to D, and I don't pause or repeat on any other notes, it sounds like D Dorian. So that's the point of the root to root method, so that's how I want you to practice it. Simple enough, E flat Dorian is precisely the same physical shape on the guitar, just up a half step. So you would improvise with that during that chord, and then go back down here. Okay, so that's what Dorian means. Those are the scales and the scale shapes to practice with and improvise with on this tune. I will now demonstrate improvising with exactly those scale shapes one time through the form of Impressions. I already mentioned this lesson, but I really encourage you to check out my soloing over Dorian lesson. There's a link to it in the description, because I go way more in depth on how to work on improvising over this exact form, whether it's So What or Impressions, and I talk about playing with Dorian and some exercises to kind of work your way up to it. And especially I talk about phrasing and how to use phrasing to know where you are in the form. So if you're interested, please check that out. Beyond just knowing how to play a song, I want you to really feel like you know it and you have internalized it and you can speak with the song, you can express yourself. So in every video in this series, I'm giving you a different internalization tip for going deep and truly increasing your musicianship. And again, not just learning how to press a certain fret to play a certain song, but something to really strengthen your overall ability. So in this video, I want to recommend that if you're wanting to improvise over songs, there's a secret weapon that I use that helps amazingly well, which is making sure that I can play constant notes. And this is not about sounding great, because it's going to just sound like constant notes, but you want to play the right note selection that you are giving yourself the constraints for, say the 2 Dorian scales in this case, and you want to play constant notes. It can be quarter notes, eighth notes, triplets, doesn't matter really. You just are playing at a constant rate, constant duration of note type, or you can mix them up. You just don't ever pause, and you always are choosing a note that is within the selection that you want. This is a really good exercise to make sure that you're never, when you are trying to play real music, you're not stopping because you lost sight of what the note selection is around you. So it's just forcing you to say, yeah, I know where everything is. I could keep playing if I want to, but I want to stop here because I want to actually say something with the space that I'm using. So ironically, adding more notes, playing constantly, actually helps us use space to our advantage later, and you can play really sparse and really intentionally because you're pausing because you want to and not because you lost where you are on the fretboard. So with all of these scales I'm giving you with this whole series and exactly where you can play everything. You can do this with chord tones. I make sure I do it with chord tones and with scales on every song I want to actually be able to fluently improvise with, and I do that in my single location improv method zone before I branch out anywhere else on the guitar. So constant note improvisation is my little tip for you here, and I'll give you my impressions guitar listening recommendation in 1 second. But first, I showed you the scales that you need to improvise over this in one position on the guitar, but this song is simple enough that you can start playing all over the neck much sooner than other songs. You can absolutely play C major, think of C major scale, just play C major, so long as you're, treating every note fairly. Every note is equally part of D Dorian in that structure. I often am improvising and I think of a C, I'm kind of seeing it as C major for a moment, but it doesn't sound like C major to me. I'm just using that because I'm familiar with the structure of it in that way, and I'll switch around how I'm kind of seeing the structures, whether it's D Dorian C major or anything else in the key of C major. So if you want to learn the other four on top of what I showed you, scale shapes of C major, which are also D Dorian, you can download my free printable parent scales PDF, and it actually has the 7 parent scales that you need that all other modes come from. So it has harmonic minor scale, melodic minor scale, the major scale, all the main scales that you need, and then all of these modes like Dorian come out of them. But if you want to just get them to get those C major scales and really get those down and then practice it along the neck with this backing track that I have for you at the end of the video, that would be great. There's a link to my printable parent scales PDF in the description, or you can go to soundguitarlessons.com/scales to download that PDF for free. When learning a jazz standard like Impressions, your top priority should just be playing a complete version of the song. Play the melody, play the chords, improvise a solo. Make sure you actually are playing real music, even if it doesn't sound great at first, if it doesn't sound like you want it to sound, that's okay. This goal of playing through the whole version of the song will rapidly improve your playing by clarifying how you want to sound. It'll clarify what you need to work on. Plus, it gives you a place to actually apply all of the random jazz lessons and jazz tips and exercises that are out there, which I teach that stuff too. I have a bunch of stuff on my channel, but you come across these tips, you want to be able to apply them to a real song. So your priority should be playing through that. And when you're ready to level up and work on all those extra detailed exercises, I have compiled a supplementary lesson playlist, supplementary to this standard series. It's a playlist of lessons to help you sound more advanced when playing jazz. It covers chord tone improvisation, chromaticism, advanced chord voicings, jazz theory, much more. There's a link to that in the description, and you can go to that whenever you are ready. It will be in the description of every lesson in this playlist. Listening to songs that we want to play is really important. If you want a jazz guitar listening recommendation for Impressions, I recommend Wes Montgomery Live at the Half Note from 1965. This is an iconic live recording by Wes Montgomery. It is Wes Montgomery at his best. It is absolutely fantastic, and almost any jazz guitar player will know about this recording. So Impressions by Wes Montgomery Live at the Half Note from 1965 is a great listening recommendation. Make sure you listen to that or any other version of Impressions or So What, depending on which one you're wanting to work on, so you can get that in your mind and listen to it a bunch, listen to it on repeat, and it will absolutely help your playing. There's a link to a playlist of all the listening recommendations for this series in the description. And make sure you're subscribed, because I can't wait to see you in my next lesson, where we'll do song number 4 of the top 25 jazz standards for guitar players, which is going to be Fly Me to the Moon. Hit that like button and leave a comment to let me know you like this lesson. I appreciate you. Thank you so much. Thank you for watching. Take care and happy practicing.